The downpour was merciless, transforming the winding Oregon back road into a slick, black serpent that coiled through the dense evergreen forest. Caleb's headlights sliced through the deluge, catching the rain in shimmering, frantic streaks. The wipers on his old pickup fought a losing battle against the storm, and he could barely make out the road a few feet ahead. He knew these routes by heart, normally driving them with the radio humming classic rock, his mind wandering between what to make his son for dinner and whether the latest shipment of lumber had arrived at the store. But this night felt different, charged with an unsettling energy. Then, his light snagged on something. A flicker of movement at the edge of the road, a shape stumbling through the sheets of rain. Caleb slammed on the brakes, the truck's tires screeching as they skidded on the wet asphalt before lurching to a halt. He leaned forward, squinting through the water-beaded windshield, trying to comprehend the scene. It was a woman, staggering along the shoulder. She was wearing— no, it couldn't be— a wedding gown. He shifted the truck into park and rolled down the window, the cold rain immediately spattering his face. "Ma'am," he yelled, his voice nearly swallowed by the roar of the storm. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" The woman froze. She turned toward the sound of his voice with a slow, dreamlike motion. In that moment, Caleb saw her face. Even through the gloom and the torrent, with mascara tracing dark rivers down her cheeks, he saw the raw devastation in her eyes. It was a particular kind of anguish that erases the world, making a person oblivious to the cold, the rain, or the danger of a car rounding a blind curve. She was a woman of substance, and the dress, which must have been breathtaking hours earlier, was now a ruined spectacle clinging to her frame. She looked like a specter who had wandered away from her own life and forgotten the way back. "Please," Caleb said, his voice softer now but still firm enough to cut through the noise. "Whatever's happened, you can't stay out here. You'll get sick." She shook her head, a gesture so faint Caleb wasn't sure if she was refusing his help or simply unable to process his words. Her lips trembled. From the biting cold or from weeping, he couldn't tell. "I'm not going to harm you," he continued, his tone as gentle as he could manage. "I'm just a father trying to get home to my son. But I can't leave you here. I won't. Please just get in the truck." Something in his voice, some note of sincere concern, seemed to penetrate the fog surrounding her. She took a hesitant step toward the passenger side, then another. Caleb reached across the cab and pushed the door open from the inside. The woman climbed in, her movements stiff and mechanical, as if her body was on autopilot while her mind was lost somewhere far away. She was shivering uncontrollably. Caleb blasted the heater and reached into the back seat, pulling out an old, worn quilt he kept for hauling delicate furniture. It smelled faintly of sawdust and motor oil, but it was thick and dry. "Here," he said, draping it around her trembling shoulders. She gripped it with pale, tight knuckles, her gaze fixed on the dark, rain-lashed road ahead. Caleb put the truck in drive and pulled away carefully. The silence inside the cab was thick, punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof and the woman's shallow, ragged breaths. He was desperate to ask questions. What happened? Who hurt you? Do I need to call the police? But some instinct warned him that pressing her now would only deepen her trauma. "I'm Caleb," he said after a few minutes, his eyes glued to the treacherous road. "My farm is about 10 minutes from here. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. You look like you could use both right now." The woman's lips parted, but at first, no sound emerged. She swallowed and tried again. "Alara." Her voice was a fragile whisper, hoarse from crying. "My name is Alara." "Okay, Alara," Caleb said calmly. "We're going to get you somewhere safe, and then, when you're ready, you can tell me what's going on. But only if you want to. No pressure." Ilara closed her eyes, and a fresh wave of tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't make a sound, but her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Caleb felt a familiar ache in his chest. He knew grief. He had lived with its shadow for years. Whatever had happened to this woman, whatever had driven her onto a dark road in a shredded wedding dress during a storm, it was the kind of grief that irrevocably alters a person. He just drove, letting the sound of the rain fill the space between them, navigating the slick curves with practiced care, and wondering what kind of monster would leave a bride to fend for herself in the middle of a tempest. When they pulled into the gravel driveway of the farmhouse, light spilled from the living room window. Mrs. Gable would still be there, likely engrossed in a British mystery while his son, Leo, finished his drawings at the kitchen table. It was past 9, later than Caleb usually worked, but the hardware store had been swamped all day with people stocking up before the storm hit. "That's my neighbor's car," Caleb explained, nodding toward the old sedan parked near the porch. "Mrs. Gable looks after my son when I have to stay late. She's a bit of a fusspot, but in that classic grandmotherly way. I promise she's harmless." Ilara gave a slight nod but made no move to exit the truck. Caleb switched off the engine and walked around to her side, opening the door and extending his hand. She stared at it for a long moment before finally placing her icy fingers in his. The front door swung open before they reached the porch. Mrs. Gable stood silhouetted against the warm light of the house. She was in her early 70s, but carried herself with the energy of a much younger woman, her silver hair coiled in a tidy bun. "Caleb Thorne, I was about to organize a search party," she began. Then her eyes fell on Ilara, and her words caught in her throat. She stared for a full 3 seconds, her expression shifting from surprise to a fierce, protective concern. "Good heavens, get that poor girl inside this instant." Mrs. Gable ushered them in with the no-nonsense efficiency of a woman who had raised 5 children of her own. "Leo, honey, you stay in the kitchen for a few more minutes," she called over her shoulder, her entire focus now on Ilara. "Come on, sweetheart, let's get you upstairs and out of those wet things." "Dad?" Leo's voice, bright and oblivious, echoed from the kitchen. "Did you remember to get the—" He appeared in the doorway, a 7-year-old whirlwind of energy with his father's dark hair, and stopped dead in his tracks. "Whoa, why is there a princess in our living room?" Despite the circumstances, a sound that was half sob, half laugh escaped Ilara's lips. "This is Miss Ilara," Caleb said, crouching to his son's level. "She had some car trouble in the storm, so she's going to stay with us for a little while. Can you be a good host and make sure Buddy doesn't get in her way?" Buddy, their aging golden retriever, was already wagging his tail, thrilled by the unexpected commotion. "Sure," Leo said, approaching Ilara with the guileless curiosity of a child. "Do you like grilled cheese? My dad makes the best grilled cheese. We have a guest room upstairs, but the bed squeaks a lot." "Leo?" Caleb said, a gentle warning in his tone. "What? It does. You said so yourself." Mrs. Gable was already guiding Ilara toward the staircase. "Don't you worry about a thing tonight, dear," she said with quiet authority. "I have some of my daughter's old clothes upstairs that should do. She never comes to get them anyway. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow." Caleb watched them ascend the stairs, Mrs. Gable's hand resting gently on Ilara's back. He felt a tug on his sleeve and looked down to see Leo's concerned face. "Dad, is she okay? She looks really, really sad." Caleb ran a hand through his damp hair, searching for a way to explain a situation he barely understood himself. "She's had a very bad day, buddy. Maybe the worst day. So we're going to be extra nice and give her some space, all right?" Leo nodded, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. He had learned about bad days when his mother passed away. He understood, with a child's simple clarity, that sadness required gentleness. We can show her my Lego castle tomorrow. Legos always make people feel better. Caleb pulled his son into a tight hug, a wave of gratitude, pride, and sorrow washing over him all at once. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered. "I bet that would help a lot." Upstairs, Mrs. Gable moved with purpose, pulling clothes from the spare room closet, as Alara stood dripping onto the worn wooden floor, still clutching the quilt. "All right, honey, arms up." When Alara only stared blankly, Mrs. Gable's voice softened. "Come on now. Let's get you out of that beautiful, ruined dress before you catch your death of cold." Alara's hands went to the zipper at her back, but they were shaking too violently to get a grip. Without a word, Mrs. Gable stepped behind her, her nimble fingers working the zipper down with practiced ease. The gown pooled at her feet, and Alara stood in her slip, feeling stripped of more than just fabric. Mrs. Gable had witnessed a great deal in her 70-odd years. She knew heartbreak when she saw it. Whatever had put this young woman on that dark road, it was the kind of wound that could either shatter a person completely or forge them into something stronger. She handed Alara a towel and a set of warm clothes, sweatpants, and an oversized flannel shirt, and turned her back to offer a measure of privacy. "The bathroom is right through there. Take a hot shower, get dressed, and then, if you feel up to it, come on downstairs. Caleb makes a surprisingly good tomato soup. But if you'd rather just sleep, that's perfectly fine too. Nobody's keeping score." Alara's voice was cracked and small. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." Mrs. Gable turned back, her eyes sharp but filled with compassion. "Honey, I don't need to know your life story to see you need a helping hand. That's just what decent people do for one another. Now go on. Get in that shower before you turn into an icicle." 20 minutes later, Alara found herself at Caleb's kitchen table, wrapped in clothes that smelled of fresh laundry, her hair damp and hanging loosely around her shoulders. The kitchen was cozy and lived in, with children's artwork held to the refrigerator by an assortment of colorful magnets and a dish rack piled high with mismatched plates. It was the antithesis of the life she knew. The sterile, sprawling penthouse in Portland, the catered meals, the designer everything. It felt impossibly real. Caleb placed a bowl of steaming tomato soup and a plate with a perfectly grilled cheese sandwich cut into triangles in front of her. The simple, overwhelming kindness of the gesture was the final straw. The tears she had been holding back erupted in a torrent of great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Caleb froze, a look of panic on his face, but Mrs. Gable simply pulled up a chair beside Alara and squeezed her shoulder. "Let it all out, dear. Sometimes you have to let the poison drain before the healing can begin." Just then, Leo appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with alarm. "Is Miss Alara crying because she doesn't like Dad's grilled cheese?" "No, buddy," Caleb said quickly. She's just tired. Why don't you go get ready for bed? I'll be up to tuck you in shortly." "Can Miss Alara tuck me in?" Leo asked. Caleb winced. "Leo, not tonight." "It's okay," Alara managed, her voice steadier than she felt. She wiped her eyes on the sleeve of the flannel shirt and offered Leo a watery, tremulous smile. "I'd like that, if it's all right with your dad." Leo beamed and took her hand, pulling her toward the stairs while chattering about his favorite stuffed bear and a loose tooth that had been bothering him for a week. Caleb and Mrs. Gable exchanged a look. "That boy of yours has a gift," Mrs. Gable said quietly. "He knows when a person needs to feel needed again." Caleb nodded, watching as Alara disappeared up the stairs with his son. "I just hope we're doing the right thing. I don't even know her story." "You will," Mrs. Gable said, patting his arm. "When she's ready. Until then, You just do what you've always done best, Caleb Thorne. You show up, you care, and you make people feel safe. 6 hours earlier, Alara Thorne had been standing in the bridal suite of Portland's most opulent hotel. Her 5-year-old daughter, Maya, was twirling in her miniature flower girl dress, a confection of tulle and silk. The bridesmaids, however, had long since stopped bothering to whisper their catty remarks. I still can't believe they had to let the dress out twice. You'd think she could have dropped a few pounds for her own wedding. Well, Julian Vance is marrying Thorne Industries, not the woman attached to it. Love is blind, and in this case, very profitable. Alara had spent a lifetime learning to ignore such comments. As the 29-year-old heir to Marcus Thorne's corporate empire, she had been under a microscope since birth. The tabloids were relentless about her figure, and society columnists delighted in comparing her unfavorably to her famously slender mother, who had died of cancer when Alara was a teenager. But Julian Vance, the charismatic CEO of Vance Technologies, had seemed different. Or at least, she had desperately wanted him to be. He had pursued her for 2 years, sending flowers, arranging quiet dinners, and holding her close when cruel online comments brought her to tears. He told her she was beautiful, that he loved her mind and her spirit, that her size was irrelevant. She had almost started to believe him. Her cousin Chloe had burst into the suite 20 minutes before the ceremony was to begin, her face ashen, a phone clutched in her trembling hand. Alara, you have to hear this. I am so sorry, but you need to hear this now. The audio was from Julian's bachelor party. His voice, though slurred with expensive scotch, was unmistakable. Of course, I don't actually want to roll over to that every morning, but a controlling interest in Thorne Industries, that's worth faking it for a few years. Once the merger is solid and the shares are in my name, I'll find an excuse to divorce her. Shouldn't be too hard. I'll just leak a story about how she let herself go. The poor thing can barely squeeze into her gown as it is. But hey, a little sacrifice for a corporate takeover, that's just good business. His friends had roared with laughter. They had made jokes about him, taking one for the team. Alara stood there, in a custom-made gown that cost more than a small house, feeling the carefully constructed reality of her life detonate around her. Every I love you, every tender gesture, every promise had been a lie. A meticulously executed performance by a man who saw her as nothing more than a pawn in his corporate game. Her first thought was of Maya, who was happily arranging rose petals in a basket. She turned to Chloe, her voice a raw whisper. Take her. Take Maya right now. Don't say a word to anyone. Go to your apartment, lock the door, and wait for me to call you. Do you understand? Chloe, tears streaming down her face, simply nodded, scooped up a confused Maya, and slipped out of the room. Alara took one last look in the mirror, then she ripped the veil from her hair, grabbed her small purse, and ran. She shoved past the makeup artist, ignored the frantic calls of the wedding planner, and sprinted through the hotel lobby, a blur of white silk and desperation. She ran out into the gray, drizzling afternoon and didn't stop until she reached the city's bus depot. The agent behind the counter stared, but Alara bought a ticket for the first bus heading east, to a place she'd never heard of, Cedar Creek. It sounded quiet. It sounded perfect. The ride was a blur of tears and strangers' stares. An elderly man offered her a tissue. A young woman asked if she needed to call someone. Alara refused all of it, watching as the city skyline dissolved into suburbs, then into the vast, rain-soaked forests of Oregon. When the bus dropped her at Cedar Creek's tiny, deserted station, she just kept walking. The drizzle intensified into a downpour, but she hardly felt it, letting the rain wash away the last of her illusions, until her legs finally gave out, and she was stumbling along a dark country road, right into the path of Caleb's headlights. Upstairs in the farmhouse, Leo was proudly showing Alara his most treasured possessions. There was the smooth, gray skipping stone he'd found by the river, the shark tooth his uncle had brought him from California, and a fossilized fern Mrs. Gable had helped him identify. "And this one," Leo said, holding up a simple piece of quartz, "Dad says I found it on the day my mom died. I didn't know she was going to die yet. But I found this rock, and holding it made me feel better. So now when I'm sad, I hold it, and it reminds me that even broken things can still be beautiful." Alara felt the air catch in her throat. "Your mom?" Leo nodded, climbing into bed with the matter-of-factness of a child who has made peace with a difficult truth. "Dad says she was the best. He said she had a sickness that made her body get confused, and the doctors couldn't fix it. Sometimes bodies just don't work right, I guess." He looked up at Alara, his eyes startlingly perceptive. "Are you sad because your body doesn't work right?" "No, sweetie," Alara said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I'm sad because I thought someone loved me, but it turned out to be a trick." Leo considered this with grave seriousness. "Dad says that people who don't know how to love are missing a piece inside them. Like if you couldn't taste ice cream or hear your favorite song. He says it's sad for them, but you can't give them the missing piece. They have to find it themselves." "Your dad sounds very wise." "He is," Leo agreed. "He's not super rich or anything, and sometimes he burns the toast, but he's the best dad. And Mrs. Gable says he deserves to be happy again." He paused, then added with a child's blunt honesty, "You should stay here. You're nice, and you listen really well. Plus, Dad gets lonely, even when he pretends he's not." Alara felt fresh tears sting her eyes, but this time they weren't born of sorrow. "I'm not sure how long I'm staying, Leo. I have to figure some things out." "That's okay," he said, burrowing under his blankets. "Dad always says the best things are worth waiting for. Maybe you just need to wait here for a little bit." Alara tucked him in, smoothing his dark hair from his forehead. As she did, she felt a quiet sense of calm settle over her, something that felt distantly, hopefully, like peace. The days bled into a week, and then two. Alara occupied the squeaky-bedded spare room, wore Mrs. Gable's daughter's hand-me-down clothes, and slowly began to feel the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. She helped with Leo after school, supervising homework and listening to elaborate explanations about the worlds he built in Minecraft. She took long walks on the trails behind the farmhouse, breathing in the crisp autumn air and marveling at the quiet majesty of the forest. She sat in Caleb's kitchen while he cooked, the two of them falling into an easy rhythm of casual conversation and comfortable silences. Caleb never pried. He made it clear he was there to listen if she wanted to talk, but he never demanded her story. It was a stark contrast to her father's well-intentioned but relentless inquiries about her feelings, and to Julian's performative concern, which she now recognized as pure manipulation. After 2 weeks of daily, tearful phone calls with her daughter, Alara felt a fragile sense of stability take root. She asked Chloe to bring Maya to Cedar Creek. The reunion in Caleb's driveway was a storm of tears and relieved hugs. Maya, resilient as only a child can be, was mostly excited to meet Leo and the big dog, Buddy. The two children hit it off immediately, their laughter filling the old farmhouse and suturing the remaining cracks in Alara's heart. It was on the third Friday of her stay that Alara finally told Caleb everything. They were cleaning up after dinner, the children asleep upstairs, the house quiet. "Julian Vance," she said, her hands still in the warm, soapy water. "That was his name. The man I was supposed to marry." Caleb didn't look at her, just continued drying a plate with methodical care. "Do you want to talk about it?" So she did. She told him about the recording, the cruel laughter, The humiliating escape through a hotel full of wedding guests. She told him about the lifetime of tabloid headlines and the way she had allowed herself to believe Julian was different, that he saw beyond her name and her inheritance. He was using me, she said, her voice thick with renewed pain. The whole time. 2 years of my life, and I was just a business acquisition. Thorn Industries was all he ever wanted. He said I was a sacrifice he was willing to make for a corporate takeover. Caleb set the dish towel down slowly, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. Some people spend their whole lives thinking value is something you can count in a bank account. They never learn that the things that truly matter can't be bought or sold. He turned to face her, and Alara was struck by the gentle intensity in his gaze. My wife Isabel, she was a first-grade teacher. She never made much money. We scraped by a lot of the time, especially after Leo was born and the medical bills started coming. But she was the richest person I ever knew. Rich in kindness, in patience, in joy. She could make Leo giggle when he was crying his eyes out. She could make me feel like the luckiest man on earth, even when we were eating boxed mac and cheese for the 3rd night in a row. He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Julian Vance is a fool, Ilara, he said quietly. Not because he lost out on a fortune, but because he had you, and he was too blind to see what he had. That's the real tragedy. You showed up on my doorstep broken, and you still managed to bring more laughter into this house than I've heard in years. You listened to my son's rambling stories about video games like they're the most fascinating thing in the world. You've already rearranged my pantry twice. You're brilliant and kind and resilient. If Julian couldn't see that, then he's not just a fool. He's missing the part that makes a person human. Alara was crying again, but these tears felt different. They felt like a release, like a cleansing rain after a long drought. I don't know who I am without my father's name, she admitted in a small voice. Without Thorn Industries and the money. That's all Julian saw. It's all anyone ever sees. It's not what I see, Caleb said simply. I see Alara, the woman who taught my son how to make the perfect paper airplane and is teaching his dad that it's okay to let someone help. The mom who reads bedtime stories with funny voices. The rest of that stuff is just noise. Alara reached out and took his hand. His fingers, calloused from work, closed around hers, warm and steady. In that simple touch, she felt the first tentative beginning of a new foundation being laid. As October faded into November, Alara felt herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with the number on a scale. The real transformation was internal. She started helping out at Cedar Creek Hardware during busy periods, and to her own astonishment, she loved it. The business degree she'd earned from a prestigious university, always feeling like just another box to check on her father's list of expectations, was suddenly useful in tangible ways. She overhauled Caleb's chaotic inventory system, implemented a new point-of-sale software, and used her dormant negotiating skills to get better deals from their suppliers. You're wasted on a small-town hardware store, Caleb remarked one afternoon, watching her finalize an order with an effortless confidence that left him slightly in awe. You should be running a Fortune 500 company. I don't want to run a company, Alara replied, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. I want this. I want to do something that's small enough to feel real. Mrs. Patterson came in yesterday and told me the new aisle layout I designed helped her find the exact bolts she needed for her husband's wheelchair ramp. That felt better than any quarterly earnings report I ever presented. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the kind that made Alara's heart perform a complicated little flip. Isabel would have liked you, he said softly. She always said that the only success that matters is the kind that makes someone else's life a little bit better. A new rhythm established itself. Friday nights became movie nights. The four of them piled onto Caleb's worn-out sofa. Leo and Maya wedged between them. Buddy the dog sprawled across their feet. They worked their way through animated classics and old adventure films, the children providing a running commentary. Sometimes, Alara would catch Caleb watching her instead of the movie, his expression open and unguarded, and a warmth would spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fireplace. December arrived, blanketing Cedar Creek in a thick layer of snow and a quiet magic Alara had forgotten could exist. Leo and Maya taught her the proper technique for making snow angels, and they built a lopsided but cheerful snow family in the front yard. A dad, a mom, a boy, and a girl. Mrs. Gable brought over her legendary hot chocolate mix, and they spent evenings in the kitchen, the windows fogged up, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon and contentment. Ilara and Caleb had fallen into a gentle, unspoken orbit around each other. Their hands would brush as they passed dishes. Their conversations would stretch late into the night after the children were asleep, covering everything from childhood dreams to unspoken fears. During one fierce snowstorm that knocked out the power, they sat by the fire, and Caleb had draped his arm around her shoulders. In that simple embrace, Ilara felt a profound sense of safety she had never experienced in her father's fortified penthouse. But they hadn't crossed the final line. It was as if they were both holding their breath, waiting for Ilara to be certain she was choosing this life, not just escaping her old one, waiting for Caleb to be sure he wasn't taking advantage of a woman in crisis. The unspoken tension was a delicate, sweet agony. As Christmas neared, the children's excitement was a constant, buzzing energy in the house. They insisted on getting a real tree, and the four of them spent a Saturday decorating it with a motley collection of ornaments. Handmade creations from Leo's preschool days, a few elegant glass baubles that had belonged to Isabel, and new glittery ones Ilara and Maya had picked out at the store. "This is the best Christmas ever," Leo announced, carefully hanging a reindeer on a low branch, "because you and Maya are here." "I'm glad we're here too," Ilara said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, after the kids had finally succumbed to a sugar and excitement crash, Ilara sat at the kitchen table with Caleb's laptop. She had been avoiding this for months, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. With a trembling hand, she typed her own name into the search bar. The results were a tidal wave. Headlines from Portland newspapers, society blogs, gossip sites. Heiress vanishes hours before wedding. Julian Vance devastated by fiancé's disappearance. Friends fear for Ilara Thorne's mental state. She felt a surge of nausea as she read Julian's expertly fabricated quotes about his concern, his undying love, his hope for her safe return. There were statements from bridesmaids expressing worry, all of them thinly veiled judgments. And then there was her father's official no comment, a silence that spoke volumes of his humiliation and disappointment. "Hey," Caleb's voice was soft from the doorway. "You okay?" Ilara slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. He had seen. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat, his presence a quiet comfort. "You don't owe them an explanation," he said firmly. "Not a single one." "My father must be mortified," she whispered. "All that money, all those important guests, and I just ran." "Your father loves you," Caleb said. "He might be disappointed that things didn't go according to his plan. But if he knew what Julian really said—" "He doesn't know," Ilara cut in. "Chloe has the recording, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him. He was so proud of the match. Julian was everything he thought I needed. If I tell him the truth, he'll just blame himself for pushing me into it." Caleb was silent for a long moment, considering her words. "Or maybe," he said finally, "your father deserves to know the truth. Not so you can punish him, but so you can free both of you from the lie." Alara looked at him, this man who had rescued her without a second thought, who had given her a sanctuary without asking for anything in return, who had welcomed her and her daughter into his life with a quiet generosity that still humbled her. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared of facing all of that again. Scared of losing this." Caleb took her hand, his warm, steady fingers enveloping hers. "You're not going to lose this. This is real. But you can't hide from the rest of your life forever, Alara. At some point, you have to decide what you're doing. Are you running away from your old life, or are you running towards a new one?" The question hung in the quiet kitchen, filled with the weight of all her possible futures. 4 months after that stormy October night, with the holidays a warm memory, and January settled into its quiet, frozen rhythm, Alara's new phone pinged with an email notification. She was at Caleb's kitchen table, going over inventory reports for the hardware store when she saw the sender's name, Marcus Thorne. Her heart began to pound against her ribs. She had ignored all his previous attempts to contact her, the calls to her old number, the messages left with her former assistant. She'd even spotted a car with a private investigator parked down the road a few weeks back, a car that had vanished the next day. She had assumed her father had finally given up. With a shaking hand, she opened the message. "My dearest Alara, I have known where you are for almost 4 months. A good private investigator is remarkably efficient when one is not concerned about the cost. Before you panic, please know that I have not shared this information with anyone. Not the press, not Julian, not even my own board of directors. I know about the recording. Chloe finally played it for me after Christmas, once she was absolutely certain you were safe and well. I listened to that boy, and he is just a boy for all his posturing, talk about my daughter. My brilliant, kind, incredible daughter. And my first instinct was to ruin him. I very nearly did. But then I realized that you had already done so, far more effectively, by simply choosing yourself. Alara, I have been a fool. I pushed you toward Julian because I equated security with wealth and status. I forgot the most important lesson your mother ever taught me. That true security comes from being loved for who you are, not for what you represent. She chose me when I had nothing but calloused hands and a head full of dreams. She believed in me and made me the man I became. I've had a background check done on Caleb Thorne. Widowed father, owner of a small hardware store, drives a 15-year-old truck, has a modest savings account, and a mortgage he'll be paying for the next 2 decades. On paper, he is everything I was raised to guard you against. In the photographs the investigator sent me, I have never seen you look happier. You are laughing, Alara. You look whole in a way you never did with Julian. I am not asking you to come home. I am asking for your forgiveness, and perhaps for the chance to meet the family you have found for yourself. Your daughter Maya deserves a grandfather who will spoil her rotten. And as for Mr. Thorne, I would like to shake the hand of the man who stopped on a dark road and saved my daughter when I could not. P.S. Julian Vance is the subject of a federal investigation for securities fraud and corporate espionage. It seems he was planning to steal far more than just your heart. I have taken steps to ensure he will never trouble you again. The official story is that you discovered his duplicity and called off the wedding. You are safe. I love you. And I am so sorry I failed to show it in the ways that truly mattered. Your loving and foolish father, Marcus. Alara read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face, a complex cocktail of grief, relief, and overwhelming joy coursing through her. She heard Caleb's truck pull into the driveway and met him at the door, phone in hand, unable to form words through her sobs. He took one look at her face and immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as she shook. "What is it? Are you okay? Are the kids all right?" "Read this," she managed, pushing the phone into his hand. Caleb read the email, his expression shifting from concern to surprise, and then to a deep, gentle understanding. When he finished, he looked at her, his warm brown eyes, which had become her anchor in the storm, searching hers. "What do you want to do?" he asked simply. Alara took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping at her tears. "I want to stay here, with you and Leo and Maya. This place, this life, it's more real than anything I've ever known. But I want my father to know I forgive him. I want him to meet you. I want the 2 parts of my life, the before and the after, to finally come together." Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away the last of her tears. "Then that's what we'll do," he said softly. "We'll figure it out. Together." And then, finally, he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of hesitation or questioning. It was a kiss of certainty, of arrival. The kiss of a man who had waited patiently, giving her the space to heal, to be sure she was choosing him, not just escaping her past. Alara kissed him back with all the fear, hope, and love that had been building inside her for months. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Dad," Leo's voice, sleepy and indignant, drifted down from upstairs. "Is Miss Alara crying again? Should I get my Legos?" They both laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "No Legos needed, buddy," Caleb called back. "Everything's good. Everything's really, really good." "Finally," came the reply from upstairs, followed by a second, smaller voice chiming in. "I told Mrs. Gable you guys would figure it out." Caleb and Alara looked at each other and laughed even harder, the sound echoing through the warm, quiet farmhouse. And in that laughter was the unmistakable sound of a future being built, a family being forged, and a love that had quietly, steadily grown from the ashes of a life left behind. 18 months after that rainy October night, the small community church in Cedar Creek was filled with an unlikely mix of people. There were the local townspeople who had embraced Alara and Maya as their own, business titans from Portland and New York, who looked slightly out of place in the simple wooden pews, Mrs. Gable's sprawling extended family, and a handful of Leo and Maya's friends, who were mostly there for the promise of cake. Alara stood in the church's tiny anteroom, looking at her reflection. She wore a simple cream-colored dress from a boutique on Main Street, comfortable and elegant, with wildflowers from Mrs. Gable's garden woven into her hair. There was no army of bridesmaids, no celebrity makeup artist, no suffocating designer gown. There was just her, about to marry a man who loved her exactly as she was. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Marcus Thorne said from the doorway. He looked older than he had 18 months ago, but the deep lines around his eyes were from smiling now, not stress. He and Caleb had formed an unexpectedly strong bond, discovering a shared passion for restoring classic cars and a mutual devotion to Alara and the children. "Daddy," Alara said, turning to him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Thank you for everything." Marcus crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Thank you for teaching this old fool that a man's worth isn't measured by his stock portfolio." He smiled, his own eyes misty. "Your mother would be so proud. She always said you had too much fire in you to ever follow someone else's map." The opening notes of the processional began to play. Marcus offered her his arm. "Ready?" Elara took it, her heart feeling full to the point of bursting. "I'm already there," she said. "This just makes it official." They walked down the aisle together, past Mrs. Gable dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, past the crew from the hardware store in their Sunday best. At the front of the church, Leo stood proudly in a miniature suit, serving as the ring bearer, while Maya, the flower girl, beamed from ear to ear. And then there was Caleb, looking handsome and happy and slightly overwhelmed, his eyes locked on hers as if she were the only person in the world. When Marcus placed Elara's hand in Caleb's, he leaned in and whispered to his new son-in-law, "You take care of my girl, or I will be forced to use my considerable resources in creative and unpleasant ways." Caleb grinned. "Yes, sir." "Good man," Marcus said. Then, loud enough for the front pews to hear, "She's yours now. Don't mess it up." The ceremony was simple and perfect. They had written their own vows. Caleb promised to always see her, truly see her, and to never run out of terrible dad jokes. Elara promised to love his son as her own and to always make sure the pantry was organized. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her with the easy, loving confidence of a man who had found his home, and the church erupted in applause. The reception was held in the hardware store's garden center, which had been transformed with twinkling lights and mason jars full of wildflowers. Marcus had offered to rent out the grandest ballroom in Oregon, but they had politely declined. This was their place, their community, their life. When it was time for toasts, Leo and Maya climbed onto a pair of chairs, tapping their plastic cups of sparkling cider with spoons. "I'm Leo and this is Maya," Leo announced to the crowd, "and we want to say something about our dad and our new mom." Elara felt her throat tighten at the casual, natural way he said "mom." "My dad was sad for a long time after my first mom died," Leo continued with a child's simple honesty. He smiled, but his eyes were sad. "And then Elara came to our house in a really wet dress, and she was sad too. But then they started being not sad together. And now we're all happy. So I think that's pretty cool." Maya chimed in. "And she makes really good cookies and doesn't burn the pancakes like Dad does." The crowd laughed as Caleb pulled Elara close, kissing the top of her head. Later that evening, as the party swirled around them, the two of them stepped outside into the cool night air. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked softly, wrapping his arms around her. Elara thought of the opulent hotel, of Julian Vance's cruel words, of the girl in the ruined dress who thought her life was over. "Not a single one," she said, lacing her fingers through his. "That was the worst day of my life, but it brought me here. To you, to the kids, to this beautiful real life. How could I ever regret the path that led me home?" Caleb pulled her closer, and they swayed gently to the music drifting from inside. "When I saw you on the side of that road," he murmured against her hair, "I thought I was just helping a stranger in trouble. I had no idea I was meeting my future." "And I thought my life had just ended," Elara whispered back. "I didn't know it was finally beginning."